Voices Beyond Pages. This is The Fall of Gondolin by J.R.R. Tolkien.
Now came days when Tuor had dwelt among the Gondolin many years. Long had he known and cherished a love for the king's daughter, and now was his heart full of that love. Great love, too, had Idril for Tuor, and the strands of her fate were woven with his, even from that day when first she gazed upon him from a high window as he stood a way-worn suppliant before the palace of the king. Little cause had Turgon to withstand their love, for he saw in Tuor a kinsman of comfort and great hope. Thus was first wed a child of men with a daughter of elfiness. Nor was Tuor the last. Less bliss have many had than they, and their sorrow in the end was great. Yet great was the mirth of those days, when Idril and Tuor were wed before the folk in Gar Anion, the place of the gods, nigh to the king's halls. A day of merriment was that wedding to the city of Gondolin, of the greatest happiness to Tuor and Idril. Therefore dwelt they in joy in that house upon the walls that looked out south over Tumladen, and this was good to the hearts of all in the city, save Meglin alone. Now, that gnome was come of an ancient house, though now were its numbers less than others. But he himself was nephew to the king by his mother, the king's sister, Isfin, and that tale may not be here told. Now, the sign of Meglin was a sable mole, and he was great among quarrymen, and a chief of the delvers after all, and many of those belonged to his house. Less fair was he than most of this goodly folk. He was swart, and of none too kindly mood, so that he won small love, and whispers there were that he had an orc's blood in his veins, but I know not how this could be true. Now, he had bid often with the king for the hand of Idril, yet Turgon, finding her very loath, had as often said nay. For him seemed Meglin's suit was caused as much by the desire of standing in high power beside the royal throne, as by love of that fair maid. Fair indeed was she, and brave thereto, and the people called her Idril of the silver feet, in that she went ever barefoot and bareheaded, king's daughter as she was, save only at pomps of the Ainur, and Meglin gnawed his anger, seeing Tuor thrust him out. In these days came to pass the fulfillment of the time of the desire of the Valar, and the hope of the Eldele. For in great love Idril bore to Tuor a son, and he was called Earendel. Now, thereto, there are many interpretations both among elves and men, but belike it was a name wrought of some secret tongue among the Gondolin, and that has perished with them from the dwellings of the earth. Now, this babe was of greatest beauty, his skin of a shining white, and his eyes of a blue surpassing that of the sky in southern lands, bluer than the sapphires of the raiment of Manwë. And the envy of Meglin was deep at his birth, but the joy of Turgon and all the people very great indeed. Behold now, many years have gone since Tuor was lost amid the foothills, and deserted by those Noldoli. Yet many years too have gone since to Melko's ears came first those strange tidings, faint were they and various in form, of a man wandering amid the dales of the waters of Sirion. Now, Melko was not much afraid of the race of men in those days of his great power, and for this reason did Ulmo work through one of his kindred for the better deceiving of Melko, seeing that no Valar and scarce any of the Eldar or Noldoli might stir unmarked of his vigilance. Yet none the less, Foreboding smote that ill heart at the tidings, and he got together a mighty army of spies. Sons of the orcs were there, with eyes of yellow and green like cats that could pierce all glooms, and see through mist or fog or night. Snakes that could go every whither, and search all crannies, or the deepest pits, or the highest peaks, listen to every whisper that ran in the grass or echoed in the hills. Wolves there were, and ravening dogs, and great weasels, full of the thirst of blood, whose nostrils could take scent moons old through running water, or whose eyes find among shingle footsteps that had passed a lifetime since. Owls came, and falcons, whose keen glances might descry by day or night the fluttering of small birds in all the woods of the world, and the movement of every mouse or vole or rat that crept or dwelt throughout the earth. All these he summoned to his hall of iron, and they came in their multitudes. Thence he sent them over the earth to seek this man who had escaped from the land of shadows, but yet far more curiously and more intently to search out the dwelling of the Noldoli that had escaped his thraldom, for these his heart burned to destroy or to enslave. Now, while Tuor dwelt in happiness and in great increase of knowledge and might in Gondolin, these creatures through the years, untiring, nosed among the stones and rocks, hunted the forests and the heaths, espied the airs and lofty places, tracked all the paths about the dales and plains, and neither let nor stayed. From this hunt they brought a wealth of tidings to Melko. Indeed, among many hidden things that they dragged to light, they discovered that way of escape whereby Tuor and Voronwe entered aforetime. Nor had they done so save by constraining some of the less stout of the Noldoli with dire threats of torment to join in that great ransacking. For because of the magic about that gate, no folk of Melko, unaided by the gnomes, could come to it. Yet now they had pried of late far into its tunnels, and captured within many of the Noldoli creeping there to flee from thraldom. They had scaled, too, the encircling hills at certain places, and gazed upon the beauty of the city of Gondolin, and the strength of Amon Gwareth from afar. But into the plain they could not win for the vigilance of its guardians, and the difficulty of those mountains. Indeed, the Gondolin were mighty archers, and bows they made of a marvel of power. Therewith they might shoot an arrow into heaven 7 times as far as could the best bowmen among men shoot at a mark upon the ground, and they would have suffered no falcon to hover long over their plain, or snake to crawl therein, for they liked not creatures of blood, broodlings of Melko. Now, in those days was Earendel 1 year old, when these ill tidings came to that city of the spies of Melko, and how they encompassed the vale of Tumladen around. Then Torgon's heart was saddened, remembering the words of Tuor in past years, before the palace doors, and he caused the watch and ward to be thrice strengthened at all points, and engines of war to be devised by his artificers, and set upon the hill. Poisonous fires and hot liquids, arrows and great rocks, was he prepared to shoot down on any who would assail those gleaming walls. And then he abode as well content as might be. But Tuor's heart was heavier than the king's, for now the words of Ulmo came ever to his mind, and their purport and gravity he understood more deeply than of old. Nor did he find any great comfort in Idril, for her heart boded more darkly even than his own. Know then that Idril had a great power of piercing with her thought the darkness of the hearts of elves and men, the glooms of the future thereto. Further even than is the common power of the kindreds of the Eldele. Therefore she spoke thus on a day to Tuor. Know, my husband, that my heart misgives me for doubt of Meglin, and I fear that he will bring an ill on this fair realm, though by no means may I see how or when. Yet I dread lest all that he knows of our doings and preparations become in some manner known to the foe, so that he devise a new means of whelming us, against which we have thought of no defence. Lo! I dreamt on a night that Meglin builded a furnace, and coming at us unawares, flung therein Earendel, our babe, and would after thrust in thee and me. But that for sorrow at the death of our fair child I would not resist.
And Tuor answered, There is reason in thy fear, for neither is my heart good towards Meglin. Yet is he the nephew of the king, and thine own cousin, nor is there charge against him, and I see naught to do but to abide and watch.
But Idril said, This is my rede thereto. Gather thou in deep secret those delvers and quarrymen who by careful trial are found to hold least love for Meglin by reason of the pride and arrogance of his dealings among them. From these thou must choose trusty men to keep watch upon Meglin, whenso he fares to the outer hills. Yet I counsel thee to set the greater part of those in whose secrecy thou canst confide at a hidden delving, and to devise with their aid, howsoever cautious and slow that labour be, a secret way from thy house here beneath the rocks of this hill unto the vale below. Now this way must not lead toward the way of escape, for my heart bids me trust it not, but even to that far distant pass, the cleft of the eagles in the southern mountains, and the further this delving reached thitherward beneath the plain, so much the better would I esteem it. Yet let all this labour be kept dark, save from a few.
Now, there are none such delvers of earth or rock as the Noldoli, and this Melko knows. But in those places is the earth of a great hardness. And so Tuor said, The rocks of the hill of Amon-Gwareth are as iron, and only with much travail may they be cloven. Yet if this be done in secret, then must great time and patience be added. But the stone of the floor of the Vale of Tumladen is as forged steel, nor may it be hewn without the knowledge of the Gondolin, save in moons and years.
Idril said then, Sooth this may be, but such is my rede, and yet there is time to spare.
Then Tuor said that he might not sell its purport, but better is any plan than a lack of counsel, and I will do even as thou sayest. Now, it so chanced that not long after Meglin went to the hills for the getting of ore, and straying in the mountains alone, was taken by some of the orcs prowling there, and they would do him evil and terrible hurt, knowing him to be a man of the Gondolin. This was, however, unknown of Tuor's watchers. But evil came into the heart of Meglin, and he said to his captors, Know then that I am Meglin, son of Eöl, the dark elf, who had to wife Isfin, sister of Tuorgon, king of the Gondolin. But they said, What is that to us? And Meglin answered, Much is that to you, for if you slay me, be it speedy or slow, ye will lose great tidings concerning the city of Gondolin, that your master would rejoice to hear. Then the orcs stayed their hands, and said they would give him life if the matters he opened to them seemed to merit that. And Meglin told them of all the fashion of that plain and city, of its walls and their height and thickness, and the valour of its gates, of the host of men at arms who now obeyed Tuorgon he spoke, and the countless hoard of weapons gathered for their equipment, of the engines of war and the venomous fires. Then the orcs were wroth, and having heard these matters, were yet for slaying him there and then as one who impudently enlarged the power of his miserable folk to the mockery of the great and puissance of Melko. But Meglin, catching at a straw, said, Think ye not that ye would rather pleasure your master, if ye brought to his feet so noble a captive, that he might hear my tidings of himself, and judge of their verity? Now, this seemed good to the orcs, and they returned from the mountains about Gondolin to the hells of iron and the dark halls of Melko. Thither they haled Meglin with them, and now was he in a sore dread. And when he knelt before the black throne of Melko in terror of the grimness of the shapes about him, of the wolves that sat beneath that chair, and of the adders that twined about his legs, Melko bid him speak. Then told he those tidings, and Melko hearkening spoke very fair to him, that the insolence of his heart in great measure returned. Now the end of this was that Melko aided, by the cunning of Meglin, devised a plan for the overthrow of Gondolin. For this, Meglin's reward was to be a great captaincy among the orcs. Yet Melko proposed not in his heart to fulfill such a promise. But Tuor and Earendel should Melko burn, and Idril be given to Meglin's arms, and such promises was that evil one feigned to redeem. Yet, as meed of treachery, did Melko threaten Meglin with the torment of the Balrogs. Now these were demons, with whips of flame and fire, and claws of steel, by whom he tormented those of the Noldoli who durst withstand him in anything, and the Eldar have called them Malkorauki. But the rede that Meglin gave to Melko was that not all the host of the orcs, nor the Balrogs in their fierceness, might by assault or siege hope ever to overthrow the walls and gates of Gondolin, even if they availed to win unto the plain without. Therefore he counselled Melko to devise out of his sorceries a succour for his warriors in their endeavour. From the greatness of his wealth of metals and his powers of fire, he bid them make beasts like snakes and dragons, of irresistible might, that should overcreep the encircling hills, and lap that plain and its fair city in flame and death. Then Meglin was bidden fare home, lest in his absence men suspect somewhat. But Melko wove about him the spell of bottomless dread, and he had thereafter neither joy nor quiet in his heart. Nevertheless, he wore a fair mask of good liking and gaiety, so that men said, Meglin is softened. And he was held in less disfavour, yet Idril feared him the more. Now Meglin said, I have laboured much, and am minded to rest, and to join in the dance and the song and the merrymakings of the folk. And he went no more quarrying stone or ore in the hills, yet in sooth he sought herein to drown his fear and disquiet. A dread possessed him that Melko was ever at hand, and this came of the spell. He durst never again wander amid the mines, lest he again fall in with the orcs, and be bidden once more to the terrors of the halls of darkness. Now the years fare by, and egged by Idril, Tuor keepeth ever at his secret delving, but seeing that the leaguer of spies hath grown thinner, Tuorgon dwelleth more at ease, and in less fear. Yet these years are filled by Melko in the utmost ferment of labour, and all the thrall folk of the Noldoli must dig unceasingly for metals, while Melko sitteth and deviseth fires, and calleth at flames and smokes to come from the lower heats, nor doth he suffer any of the Noldoli to stray ever a foot from their places of bondage. Then on a time Melko assembled all his most cunning smiths and sorcerers, and of iron and flame they wrought a host of monsters, such as have only at that time been seen, and shall not again be till the great end. Some were all of iron so cunningly linked that they might flow like slow rivers of metal, or coil themselves around and above all obstacles before them. And these were filled in their innermost depths with the grimmest of the orcs, with scimitars and spears. Others of bronze and copper were given hearts, and spirits of blazing fire, and they blasted all that stood before them with the terror of their snorting, or trampled whatso escaped the ardour of their breath. Yet others were creatures of pure flame, that writhed like ropes of molten metal, and they brought to ruin whatever fabric they came nigh, and iron and stone melted before them, and became as water. And upon them rode the Balrogs in hundreds, and these were the most dire of all those monsters which Melko devised against Gondolin. Now When the seventh summer had gone since the treason of Meglin, and Earendel was yet of very tender years, though a valorous child, Melko withdrew all his spies. For every path and corner of the mountains was now known to him. Yet the Gondolin thought in their unwariness that Melko would no longer seek against them, perceiving their might and the impregnable strength of their dwelling. But Idril fell into a dark mood, and the light of her face was clouded, and many wondered thereat. Yet Tuorgon reduced the watch and ward to its ancient numbers, and to somewhat less. As autumn came, and the gathering of fruits was over, folk turned with glad hearts to the feasts of winter. But Tuor stood upon the battlements, and gazed upon the encircling hills. Now behold, Idril stood beside him, and the wind was in her hair, and Tuor thought that she was exceedingly beautiful, and stooped to kiss her. But her face was sad, and she said, "Now come the days when thou must make choice." And Tuor knew not what she said. Then, drawing him within their halls, she said to him how her heart misgave her for fear concerning Earendel, their son, and foreboding that some great evil was nigh, and that Melko would be at the bottom of it. Then Tuor would comfort her, but might not, and she questioned him concerning the secret delving, and he said how it now led a league into the plain, and at that was her heart somewhat lightened. But still she counselled that the delving be pressed on, and that henceforth should speed way more than secrecy, because now is the time very near. And another rede she gave him, and this he took also, that certain of the bravest and most true among the lords and warriors of the Gondolin be chosen with care, and told of that secret way and its issue. These she counselled him to make into a stout guard, and to give them his emblem to wear, that they might become his folk, and to do this under pretext of the right and dignity of a great lord, kinsman to the king. Moreover, she said, I will get my father's favour to that. In secret, too, she whispered to folk that if the city came to its last stand, or Tuorgon be slain, that they should rally about Tuor and her son, and to this they laughed a yea, saying, however, that Gondolin would stand as long as Taniquetil, or the mountains of Valinor. Yet to Tuorgon she spoke not openly, nor suffered Tuor to do so, as he desired, despite their love and reverence for him. A great and a noble and glorious king he was, seeing that he trusted in Meglin and held with blind obstinacy to his belief in the impregnable might of the city, and that Melko sought no more against it, perceiving no hope therein. Now in this he was ever strengthened by the cunning sayings of Meglin. Behold, the guile of that gnome was very great, for he wrought much in the dark, as so that folk said, he doth well to bear the sign of a sable mole. And by reason of the folly of certain of the quarrymen, and yet more by reason of the loose words of certain among his kin, to whom word was somewhat unwarily spoken by Tuor, he gathered a knowledge of the secret work, and laid against that a plan of his own. And so winter deepened, and it was very cold for those regions, so that frost fared about the plain of Tumladen. Ice lay on its pools. Yet the fountains played ever on Amon Gwareth, and the two trees blossomed, and folk made merry till the day of terror that was hidden in the heart of Melko. In these ways that bitter winter passed, and the snows lay deeper than ever before on the encircling hills. Yet in its time a spring of wondrous glory melted the skirts of those white mantles, and the valley drank the waters and burst into flowers. So came and passed, with revelry of children, the festival of Nost Nalothion, or the birth of flowers, and the hearts of the Gondolin were uplifted for the good promise of the year. And now at length is that great feast Tarnin Austa, or the gates of summer, near at hand. For know that on a night it was their custom to begin a solemn ceremony at midnight, continuing it even till the dawn of Tarnin Austa broke, and no voice was uttered in the city from midnight till the break of day, but the dawn they hailed with ancient song. For years uncounted had the coming of summer thus been greeted with music of choirs, standing upon their gleaming eastern wall, and now comes even the night of vigil, and the city is filled with silver lamps, while in the groves upon the new-leaved trees lights of jewelled colours swing, and low musics go along the ways, but no voice sings until the dawn. The sun has sunk beyond the hills, and folk array them for the festival very gladly and eagerly, glancing in expectation to the east. Lo! Even when she had gone and all was dark, a new light suddenly began, and a glow there was, but it was beyond the northward heights, and men marvelled, and there was a thronging of the walls and battlements. Then wonder grew to doubt as the light waxed, and became yet redder, and doubt to dread, as men saw the snow upon the mountains dyed, as it were, with blood. And thus it was that the fire serpents of Melko came upon Gondolin. Then came over the plain riders, who bore breathless tidings from those who kept vigil on the peaks, and they told of the fiery hosts and the shapes like dragons, and they said, "Melko is upon us!" Great was the fear and anguish within that beauteous city, and the streets and byways were filled with the weeping of women, and the wailing of children, and the squares with the mustering of soldiers and the ringing of arms. There were the gleaming banners of all the great houses and kindreds of the Gondolin. Mighty was the array of the house of the king, and their colours were white, and gold, and red, and their emblems the moon and the sun, and the scarlet hart. Now in the midmost of these stood Tuor above all heads, and his mail of silver gleamed, and about him was a press of the stoutest of the folk. Lo! All these wore wings, as it were, of swans or gulls upon their helms, and the emblem of the white wing was upon their shields. But the folk of Meglin were drawn up in the same place, and sable was their harness, and they bore no sign or emblem, but their round capes of steel were covered with moleskin, and they fought with axes two-headed like mattocks. There Meglin, prince of Gondobar, gathered many warriors of dark countenance and lowering gaze about him, and a ruddy glow shone upon their faces and gleamed about the polished surfaces of their accoutrement. Behold, all the hills to the north were ablaze, and it was as if rivers of fire ran down the slopes that led to the plain of Tumladen, and folk might already feel the heat thereof. And many other kindreds were there, the folk of the swallow and the heavenly arch, and from these folk came the greatest number and the best of the bowmen, and they were arrayed upon the broad places of the walls. Now the folk of the swallow bore a fan of feathers on their helms, and they were arrayed in white and dark blue, and in purple and black, and showed an arrowhead on their shields. Their lord was Dwylin, swiftest of all men to run and leap, and surest of archers at a mark. But they of the heavenly arch, being a folk of uncounted wealth, were arrayed in a glory of colours, and their arms were set with jewels that flamed in the light now over the sky. Every shield of that battalion was of the blue of the heavens, and its boss a jewel built of 7 gems, rubies, amethysts and sapphires, emeralds, chrysoprase, topaz, and amber, but an opal of great size was set in their helms. Egalmoth was their chieftain, and he wore a mantle upon which the stars were broidered in crystal, and his sword was bent. Now none else of the Noldoli bore curved swords, yet he trusted rather to the bow, and shot therewith further than any among that host. There too were the folk of the Pillar and the Tower of Snow, and both these kindreds were marshalled by Penlod, tallest of gnomes. There were those of the Tree, and they were a great house, and their raiment was green. They fought with iron-studded clubs, or with slings, and their lord, Galdor, was held among the most valiant of all the Gondolin, save Tuorgon alone. There stood the house of the Golden Flower, who bore a rayed sun upon their shield, and their chief, Glorfindel, bore a mantle so broidered in threads of gold that it was diapered with celandine as a field in spring, and his arms were damascened with cunning gold. Then came there from the south of the city the people of the fountain, and Ecthelion was their lord, and silver and diamonds were their delight, and swords very long and bright and pale did they wield, and they went into battle to the music of flutes. Behind them came the host of the harp, and this was a battalion of brave warriors, but their leader, Salgon, was a craven, and he fawned upon Meglin. They were dight with tassels of silver and tassels of gold, and a harp of silver shone in their blazonry upon a field of black, but Salgon bore one of gold, and he alone rode into battle of all the sons of the Gondolin, and he was heavy and squat. Now, the last of the battalions was furnished by the folk of the Hammer of Wrath, and all that kindred reverenced Aule the smith more than all the other Ainur. They fought with great maces like hammers, and their shields were heavy, for their arms were very strong. In older days they had been much recruited by Noldoli, who escaped from the mines of Melko, and the hatred of this house for the works of that evil one, and the Balrogs, his demons, was exceedingly great. Now, their leader was Rog, strongest of the gnomes, scarce second in valour to that Galdor of the tree. The sign of this people was the stricken anvil, and a hammer that smiteth sparks about it was set on their shields, and red gold and black iron was their delight. Very numerous was that battalion, nor had any amongst them a faint heart, and they won the greatest glory of all those fair houses in that struggle against doom. Yet were they ill-fated, and none ever fared away from that field, but fell about Rog and vanished from the earth, and with them much craftsmanship and skill has vanished forever. This was the fashion and the array of the elven houses of the Gondolin, with their signs and emblems, and the bodyguard of Tuor, the folk of the wing, was accounted the 12th. Now is the face of that chieftain grim, and he looks not to live long, and there in his house upon the walls Idril arrays herself in mail, and seeks Earendel, and that child was in tears for the strange lights of red that played about the walls of the chamber where he slept, and tales that his nurse, Melith, had woven him concerning fiery Melko at times of his waywardness came to him, and troubled him. But his mother, coming, set about him a tiny coat of mail that she had let fashion in secret, and at that he was glad and exceedingly proud, and he shouted for pleasure. Yet Idril wept, for much had she cherished in her heart the fair city and her goodly house, and the love of Tuor, and herself that had dwelt therein. But now she saw its destroying nigh at hand, and feared that her contriving would fail against this overwhelming might of the terror of the serpents.